Have you ever seen a sarcophagus shaped like a foot in a sandal? Well, you can find one at the Archaeological Museum in Reggio Calabria. But first, a quick and dirty on the sarcophagus. A sarcophagus is essentially a coffin, and the word comes from the Greek sarcophagos, which is made up of two words, sarx, meaning body or flesh, and in modern Greek we say sarka, and phagin, which is the infinitive of the verb to eat. So sarcophagus means the thing that eats the body or the thing that eats flesh. So of course, this is not limited to Greek civilization. And you know this because when you first heard me say the word sarcophagus, you probably pictured an ancient Egyptian one, like here in this picture, like the ones that the pharaohs had and were buried in the Great Pyramids. Anyway, why should you care about sarcophagi? Well, because they teach us about how people in antiquity conceived of death, how they performed religious rites, their general beliefs about the afterlife, and of course items that they used in daily life. So, as an example, in the ancient Greek world, sarcophagi were typically made of granite, basalt, limestone, marble, or terracotta. And for elite burials, they were decorated with mythological or religious scenes, or scenes from the deceased's life. And historians learn a lot from cemeteries and what they find there. So again, let's take the material used for the sarcophagus. If the region that it's found in is marble poor, let's say, there's not a lot of marble there, but the sarcophagus is made of marble, it tells us that the person was probably important because their family had a marble sarcophagus imported, they had the skilled technicians to carve it, or maybe they had connections to a distant region. So it could indicate fashions of the time, like marble was the in vogue stone to use, or granite, or something else. Or regionally they were using wood instead, or brick. So it tells us the availability of materials and the extent to which the family of the dead would go to provide X material for the funeral. So details of the burials and the material culture found inside of a sarcophagus or a cemetery more broadly gives evidence to historians about the status of a city. Because of the items found, it could indicate that it was on a major trade route, and so a lot of unique objects from faraway places are found in this city, in the cemetery. Essentially, it gives us a peek into objects that were used in daily life. So on top of looking at the decoration on the outside of the sarcophagus and looking at the material that it's made out of, we look at the specific scenes presented on them and what that indicates about cult sites or gods that were popular at the time. And of course, people are often buried with objects like jewelry, perfume bottles, mirrors, clothes, naturally. So we learn about those daily use objects. We see about manufacturing and crafting techniques and innovations, and something we see with relative frequency in southern Italy and Sicily and in the region around Reggio is that people were buried with very fine gold leaf sheets of various sizes in the mouth of the deceased. And these golden leaf sheets are embossed with images, and they can be compared to the more traditional custom of placing a coin in the mouth of the dead, or a fare for Charon to pay for the ferry to cross the water in the underworld. And for those of you who don't remember, Charon was a ferryman of Hades who would take payment from the dead, from the spirit, and take them across the river Styx in Acheron. Okay, so we've talked about the importance that finding a sarcophagus in a cemetery serves for historians. We get an understanding for the religious life, daily life, trade and merchant routes. There's a lot of information that you can extract from finding a cemetery, a burial plot, a sarcophagus. Okay, so what about location? Where were cemeteries in antiquity? As is common practice in Mediterranean countries even today, in antiquity it was very similar. Cemeteries were beyond the city limits, usually immediately outside of the city walls. And this was to protect the city against disease, miasma. You want to keep this transition of living to afterlife separated. So they're usually outside of city walls. So when archaeologists discover grave sites, this helps them understand where were the city boundaries. And so now that we've talked about location, let's slowly make our way back to this sandal sarcophagus of Reggio. Now, when you go to the Archaeological Museum of Reggio, make sure you go to the basement level to see something very special. During the construction of the museum in 1932, archaeologists discovered a necropolis, or a grave site. It literally means city of the dead, necropolis in Greek. And so they excavated about 100 tombs, ranging from an incineration or a cremation on a burial pyre to elaborate burials like a barrel vaulted brick chamber, like you see here, to these really unique sarcophagi. And the crazy part is that this necropolis that you find casually in the basement of the Archaeological Museum in Reggio dates from between the 4th to the 2nd century BC. Anyway, so in the region of Reggio Calabria, archaeologists discovered 2 funeral pyres, which included burnt bone and grave goods, small terracotta capitals, likely because the body was placed onto kind of like a bed that stood on these 4 capitals. They found small perfume bottles, small cups, small makeup containers, and generally the graves from this region show a greater variety and wealth, again, which indicates general city wealth, a lot of elite members, popular trade routes. It tells us a lot. And we see a range in treatment of the body. So in some cases, the deceased was cremated and the ashes were buried in an urn, and in others, the body was buried intact. If somebody 1,000 years from now asks us, what was the American standard of burial? There isn't one singular answer because residents and citizens of the US belong to different confessions. Think about the last funeral that you've been to. Was the person buried in a coffin? Were they wrapped in a sheet? Were they buried with objects that they liked? I've heard of people who've died of smoking. They're buried with a pack of cigarettes, for example, or they're buried with their wedding jewelry. So think about traditions in a modern context and what questions you would ask about our own practices, and then apply those back in time. And you can see the kind of questions that we ask as historians and archaeologists. Okay, so now that we know about the concept of the sarcophagus, its uses, where they're found, what we find, and what kind of information we can extract from them. Now let's go back to this sarcophagus that I've told you about that's shaped like a foot with a sandal on a tall base. It was uncovered across from where the museum is currently, and this is a very unique sarcophagus. In all my travels to archaeological sites and to museums, I've never seen one like it. The interesting thing is that it was made for a child. And how do we know this? Because when they discovered it, they found small bones inside. Originally, it was covered with a circular brick used as a closure, like you see half of it here in this picture, and it dates from the 3rd century BC. So now you've seen a sarcophagus shaped like a foot.